event celebrating International Women's Day, I wanted to just mention that the theme for International Women's Day is called Each for Equal. And in talking about it, the subcommittee planning the event, we're talking about what Each for Equal means. And to us, it represents what each of us can do individually to bring about a collective equality for women, both locally and nationally and around the world. So we encourage you to keep that in mind, and we also have an activity that we'll be sharing with you all and having you all take part in around that theme. We also want to acknowledge the fact that it has been 100 years since women were granted the right to vote here in the United States. And while we acknowledge that that was a very difficult and hard-fought victory, and one that absolutely should be celebrated, we also want to acknowledge the fact that not all women were granted the right to vote 100 years ago. And many people are still struggling today for fair and equal access to the polls, and we remember those people, and we continue to fight and struggle for them until everyone has the right to the ballot box. So, I just want to give a quick outline of the evening. Following my remarks, we're going to have a performance by She Major. Then we will have our panelists join us, and I do want to let you know we did have a last-minute cancellation of Sasha Goodfriend from Massachusetts Now. She was not able to make it this evening. Then we'll have a question and answer session after the panel, and then another performance, and then an activity that we're all going to take part in, and then another performance from She Major. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce She Major.
For the past 4 years, come and perform. It's actually kind of insane. This is one of our favorite gigs to do, and we just love it so much. So, here is our first song, Bird Set Free by Sia.
Keep on surviving. Lived wings, I was a broken thing. Had a voice, but I could not sing. You hold me down. I struggled on the ground.
Thank you again, She Major. Give another hand. So I am now going to welcome up to the stage our panelists for the evening. Why don't you all come on up? And I'm going to give a quick introduction for each of them so that you have a little context. So I'm going to start at the far end, over here. Hold on, you are not sitting in order. I don't have not in my internal brain order that I had. Anyway, so all the way on the far side here we have Becky Gilding. So by day, she is a VP and counsel at State Street, but in addition to that, she's involved in a number of contexts in the community. So from co-hosting a podcast called The Audacity of Nope, to being on the board of Katie's Closet, which is a local nonprofit that provides clothing and toiletries to students in need, K through 8 students, I think, K through 12 students in the region, and also being a volunteer for a number of local political campaigns. So, welcome. So next we have Kristinia and Encarnacao Patt. So Kristinia is a veteran and a lifelong resident of Wakefield. So after graduating from Wakefield High, growing up in Wakefield, graduating from Wakefield High, she went on to the Military Academy at West Point, and then from there to the Army Intelligence Office, where she rose to the rank of captain. And since that time, she's come back to Wakefield, raising her 2 students here in the school system, and she's also a local business owner and works for, hold on a second, as a financial planner for First Command Financial, so giving financial planning services to those who have served our country. So, wait for it. So next we have Kate LIPPER-GARABEDIAN. So for those of us who live in Wakefield precincts 4, 5, and 6, Kate is our state representative-elect as of last week. Congratulations. So she will be representing at the State House that portion of Wakefield, the city of Melrose, and a portion of the city of Malden. And prior to that, she was a city councilor in Melrose and chief counsel at the Executive State Office of Education. So welcome, Kate. Next we have Merry Eldridge. So Merry is also a lifelong resident of Wakefield and has been celebrated in a number of venues for the breadth of her commitment to the community. So she serves as the president and the treasurer of Wakefield Alliance Against Violence, as well as on the board of directors for the Colonel James Hartshorn House, as well as a number of other local leadership efforts. So welcome, Mary. And finally, we have our moderator. So many of you will know Mehreen Butt, one of the town councilors here in Wakefield. So, wait, you don't want me to introduce you? Oh, I'm doing it. I was going to continue introducing you. So, one of our town councilors, and in fact, the first municipally elected American Muslim woman in the state of Massachusetts as well. In addition, she is an attorney and on the board for Melrose Wakefield Healthcare, and has years of experience in social justice efforts, public policy efforts, and she is going to be guiding us through this evening.
So I'm just going to say a couple of things before we start questions. I just want to recognize, I saw my fellow town councilor Ed Dabrowski enter, and also Julie Smith Galvin. So just want to recognize them. This is great. This is my 4th event, and I've learned that if you come, they finally let you be on the panel. So word of advice to everyone. And then what's really great is that if you keep on coming, they let you fill the panel with your friends. So I get to sit up here not with these amazing women, but they are all friends of mine. So I'm really excited to be here and to have this discussion with all of them, which we then should do over coffee or drinks or dinner as well. And I just wanted to, as I'm looking out at the audience and I'm seeing a lot of friends and I'm seeing past panelists and I'm seeing future panelists sitting in that corner over there. And I'm seeing a lot of friends from my book club, and I just want to take a moment to recognize we lost last night one of our members of our book club, Joanna Roberts. And I just, as we talk about International Women's Day, I just wanted to just read a little bit of her bio because she is who this event was meant for. Joanne was a member of the Women's Guild of the Most Blessed Sacrament Church in Wakefield. Joanne was a loyal and dedicated social worker. She belonged to the National Association of Social Workers, and she was the Legislative Advocacy Committee member. She also volunteered with the foster care program for Massachusetts Department of Children and Family. So as we honor women who advocate and inspire and lead, Joanne was one of those, and so I just wanted to take a moment to recognize her and remember her. Okay, and now I get to ask you guys some questions, and we cheated a little bit because you had a chance to look at the questions, but we're going to start. Hold on. And we're going to start with Merry Eldridge because she lives closest to me and is sitting closest to me. Mary, what do you think are the most important issues about gender equality?
Do I have to use this? Can you hear me?
No, you need to use that. You're in the broadcast.
Sorry. Gender equality, the most important issues facing that. Well, I think back to my own experiences, and I go back to my childhood where I was never allowed to play in any of the sports, and I was a darn good little athlete. And as a matter of fact, I lived right across the street from the Greenwood School, and the kids in my class, the males in my class, some of them, were allowed to ride their bikes to school, and because my house was right across the street, they asked if they could leave their bikes behind my house. And of course, I thought it was because they were being nice to me, but it's just that they were trying to protect their bicycles. But also that led to me watching them play some pickup football, and I'd be watching from across the street, so I wandered over one time and said, do you mind if I join you? And they said, oh no, you can't play. And I'm saying, why not, why not? And because you're a girl. And I said, yes, well, let me have the football for a second. And I kicked that football the length of the field they were playing on. So from then on, I was the kicker. But today, I was just too darn early for Title IX, I guess, because it was too late it came for me. But just, it doesn't make any sense to me to not let someone enter something, do something, just because they're a girl. If it's a man, typically a male endeavor. So I do the best I can when I see anything that is, I know I have a son and a daughter, and they were brought up very equal, and neither one was going to say anything about the other because they were that they couldn't do such and such. So I guess that's how I've dealt with it.
Representative-elect, what do you think is the most important issue around gender equality?
Thanks for having me. And is this working? I think so. Well, Mary's stories actually it's sort of nice to have a panel discussion like this, and to your point, being able to have it over coffee might even make it more organic. However, I really appreciated your anecdotes because they remind me of a couple that I was thinking about when I was preparing for this. One is when I also was growing up, I loved sports too. My father was a newspaper reporter. He was a sports columnist, so I would go with him to a lot of the sporting events he covered, a lot of college games, some professional, and was sort of a year-long athlete. But when I got to high school and I wanted to play basketball, I tried out as a freshman and I didn't make the varsity team. And there was no JV team, but I saw that there was a boys JV team. And I thought, well, that's strange. I don't know if that's allowed under Title IX. And so thanks to having Title IX, I was able to push it a little bit. And we started our own JV team. And now there has been one for any number of years. So it's a combination, I think, of a culture shift and the work that we can do just in our individual lives to encourage boys and girls to feel that they have a full slate of options for what they can do and be interested in and succeed at, but then also having a framework in place from our policymakers that really empower people to follow their paths and their dreams. So it's a combination of those two things, I think. As a mother of two young boys, and now sort of in this role, I think another thing when I think about being a woman is the responsibility of childcare and raising a family, and the degree to which that can disproportionately sometimes fall on women. And there's a book that I read a few years ago when I was in the throes of having a 3-year-old. What was it? All Joy and No Fun, The Paradox of Modern Parenting. And one of the things that I found fascinating was some research that she cited that said that the pay disparity, the wage gap between men and women is actually smaller than the wage gap between women who have children and women who don't. So to me, part of culture and policy that we also should be thinking about are ways in which we establish a framework that enable women to work fully in whatever capacity they are most interested in, including as working mothers, so that people, again, have sort of the ability to pursue their passions. That could certainly be being at home. That's an amazing passion as well. But so the sports story resonated with me, and then also thinking about raising my own children and what that means as a woman is something that comes to mind also.
Tina, what do you think are the most important issues around gender equality?
I'm going to thank you very much for including me this evening, and I will piggyback on both of their answers thus far. To start out with, I think the biggest issue for women right now is equality of pay. There are a lot of women that are doing the exact same job as a man and are getting paid much less than a man. Some of those reasons are because maybe they left the workforce to raise their family for a few years, and when they come back to that workforce, it's very difficult to even get back into the same position or the same job that you had when you left. You've been out of the workforce for a few years, so they don't think that you're as capable as a man who had stayed in. He is still a parent, and he was able to raise his children, but you had the child, you had to stay home, and that connection sometimes keeps you from going back to work full time. So pay is one thing that is a big issue. As a financial advisor, a lot of those women that stay home don't contribute to their own IRAs or their own savings, and then they are that much further behind. So if something happens to their marriage or if something happens to their husband, they are at a bigger disadvantage because they weren't contributing that entire time. Another issue that I find is that women consistently are looking to do things to serve themselves and their families, and they're looked down upon sometimes when they talk about that in the workforce. In the military, everybody is equal pay. Everybody gets, if you're a captain or an enlisted soldier, there's a rank, there's a pay grade. You're doing the same job. We need to work harder as a community and as a country to make sure that that pay gap continues to get smaller until it's not there anymore. You should hire the best person for the job, regardless of whether they are man or female, whether they are gay, straight, whether they are black or white. It should be for the position that they get paid the exact same as somebody else who's doing that exact same job. And so I think the biggest gap that we have for women is having that opportunity to go out into the workforce, be confident in yourself, and see others that are in that particular role that you can aspire to be in. So that's where we need to have more people involved in government. Right now, we have very few women that are governors of the states of America. 9 currently. We have very few women that are senators. We have very few women that are holding the top positions as CEOs or presidents of companies. We need to be able to have more women get to those positions, break that biggest glass ceiling that is out there, and continue to support others by being mentors and helping them along the way.
Hi, Becky.
Hello.
Becky's also known as Tata Bex, and I'm just going to call her that. What do you think is the most important issue around gender equality?
So I think that as we move into, like, I'm not even sure which wave of feminism we're in now, if it's 3rd or 5th or 10th. As we kind of, as feminism and gender equality evolves, I think focusing on intersectional feminism is incredibly important. So if you're not familiar with that, it means that as women, you're discriminated against in a certain manner. But as you layer on other identities, the discrimination builds up. So a black woman has higher levels of discrimination than a white woman or a trans woman or a disabled woman. So focusing on issues coming at issues, understanding the intersectional way that our identities affect those issues. So, Equal Pay Day for women is coming up. I think it's at the end of March. And there's articles about it, and there's Facebook posts about it, and there'll be a segment on the Today Show. But Equal Pay Day for my daughter or my sisters-in-law, my mother-in-law who are Latinx is November. And there's no Facebook post on November 22nd when that comes up. There's no segments on the Today Show that they're working almost an entire year more than men to attain the same kind of pay. So, or you think about issues like maternal mortality rates. So maternal mortality rates in the United States are embarrassingly low for an industrialized country. Maternal mortality rates for black and women of color are criminal. So how do we address these issues and how do we come at them to solve for the larger issue and make sure that all women are included in the solution? People like me, men at the table, when there's conversations that come up to problem solving, you make sure that you take some space, but you also make sure that you make some space and you give some space to women so that they have a seat at the table, so that they have a voice in the conversation, and so that they're part of the planning and problem solving for these types of issues.
Okay, we're going to start again with you. We're going to go backwards now. So, and I'm going to go on this theme first. We're going to talk about work first, and then kind of talk more about voting. Becky, so some of you guys are in male-dominated fields, traditionally male-dominated fields. What are some of the challenges that you face?
So I'm going to start this with a story that happened a couple years ago. So I travel quite a bit for work, and I attend client meetings, and they're generally board of directors meetings for mutual funds, and so they're generally mostly men. There have been times where I've been the only woman in the room. There was one meeting a couple years ago where they have a dinner afterwards, and they realized they had 2 extra seats at dinner. So they were like, well, who should we invite? And they said, well, how about Jack? And they're like, yeah, Jack is great. He just started. He's really, a go-getter. He's going to be a partner at this investment management firm. Definitely, let's invite Jack. And then someone said, well, what about Jane? She just started. She hasn't gotten a lot of FaceTime. And they were like, she just moved and she has a young child. And I don't know if she'd be okay. If she could, on 4 hours notice, make it to dinner. And thankfully, there was another, this board has a female director who's, I think, in her 60s. And she just said, why don't you ask Jane if she can make it? And I was cheering from her from the back of the meeting. But when I came back and I shared this story with other women that I worked with and friends, this happens a lot, and it happens with not just FaceTime or, but it happens with promotions, it happens with big projects. So it's you're taking the decision away from these women before they have the chance to say yes or no. And so for me, what I do to combat that is, as an employee, I say, yes, oh, there's gonna be a trip to India in the spring. I would love to do that, even though, I have 2 small children, you probably think I wouldn't. Or if there's a client that requires a lot of travel, sure, I would be really interested, like preemptively. But also when I'm in the room, speaking up for the women who are not in the room and making sure that, I think some of it comes from a good place and some of it comes from a real paternalistic atmosphere. So if you're in the room and you're a woman in the room or you're a man in the room, and which there are usually more of in these types of instances, speak up and say, it's real simple, just ask her and make it okay for her to say no, but give her the choice.
Captain Pat, can you talk about being in male-dominated fields? What are some of the challenges you face? And then also, what do you do to combat those challenges?
So I have spent most of my life in male-dominated pursuits. I was an athlete in high school, and a lot of women always questioned why was I, so involved in athletics. It was such a big part of my life. I had a brother who had gone to West Point. I was very interested in going to West Point. I can remember so many women, especially, why would you want to go there? What is, that benefit? And I didn't want to pass up on an opportunity for an excellent education just because I was female. I can tell you when I went to West Point, it was 1 female for every 10 guys. And being a female minority with a very long last name, you stood out. Everybody knew who you were. And it was very hard to fit in, and you didn't necessarily want to stand out as a plebe there. When I left and I was in the military, the very first unit that I went to was the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. I was one of 2 female officers in the pretty dominant male environment. We would go to the field and we would do things, and then we'd come back and they expected you to go on a spur ride, and that was hanging out with the male officers downrange and camping overnight. I didn't really want to do that, but I felt like if I didn't do that, I was going to be left out. And then I went into the medical world, and I can tell you the same thing persisted as a medical salesperson. There was predominantly men, all in their fancy business suits, and the entire time that you're there, you're just wondering, do I fit in? Do I look too sexy? Do I look too manly? Do I look too frumpy? And this is a double standard that's out there. As long as a male wears a suit, he's great. But every single woman who's out there, because they're getting scrutinized and looked at, they have that sense of, do I fit in? Am I good enough? I will definitely echo what you said. A lot of times men will offer the opportunity for bonding to go golfing or to meet for drinks afterwards. And they don't, especially in this Me Too era, want to do that for a woman. But that's where a lot of the opportunities are presented in the company. So these women who are of the same ability and same caliber aren't exposed to those opportunities and don't have the opportunity to take the next step in their careers. So I will say, for me, I've always tried to fit in. I've worked harder. I've worked longer. I have always been successful, but sometimes that comes at a price where you're constantly wondering, am I good enough, and what else do I need to do to be successful, whereas a man in the same role maybe not pushing themselves as hard. So I do think that the best thing that you can do as a female is continue to raise your hand and ask for those opportunities. Put yourself in a position where they're asking you and they're coming to you to lead the groups. And as well, the biggest thing that you can do for the next generation is be a mentor. Find your tribe that makes you feel good about yourself, that has your back, consistently work with them, get feedback, positive and negative feedback, to help those in other positions and continue to mentor so that women do have more opportunities in the future.
You're just skipping ahead to other questions, but we're going to come back to that. Kate, so you are entering, you will be one of our state reps. Women make up I think we're up to 29% in Massachusetts of the state legislature. So you are definitely entering a male-dominated role, and as an elected official in American politics, it is continuously male-dominated. So talk about some of the challenges you faced on the campaign trail and what you're doing to combat that.
Great question. And when I was thinking about how to prepare for the last question, which you're sort of building on, I thought, have me back in a year and I can answer it a little bit more completely, because to date, I think a lot of my professional positions have been either women-dominated, actually, for example, as a teacher, or certainly pretty equitable in the law or in my current job in the government. So it will be interesting to see how the dynamic feels to me personally when I'm sworn in next Wednesday and join the House of Representatives. To your point, it's very heavily male. Today I was down at the State House for a suffrage celebration and met with a couple of the women who are already in the Senate and the House, and there was some conversation a little bit about that. So certainly I will look for a network there of support to navigate that dynamic, and I expect to have mentors and champions who are women, and I'm sure men as well, so looking for allies there. On the campaign trail, I would say, I found the 32nd Middlesex District to be incredibly welcoming. Personally, I think people are quite willing to share time with me when I've been out canvassing. I can't recall really any issues related to gender, actually. If anything, my husband, who's gone knocking before, will say, his impression is if someone sees me at the door, they're pretty excited. If they see him, they're not so sure. And one thing I will say is it makes such a difference to have strong family support and a strong social network when you are campaigning. And I am very fortunate that he was able to withstand a winter of being stuck in the house every Saturday and Sunday while I was out on the trail dealing with a budding 2-year-old who can be quite, challenging. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think I'll learn a lot in the next year about what it means to be a woman in the State House when we are quite a smaller minority than one would hope at this point in time. And I'll be mindful of some of the things that you all are talking about in terms of your experiences to date in those industries, and looking for the people. And one thing I take from your examples and your anecdotes that I'm reminded of, when I was at the University of Virginia, I ended up joining the student newspaper. I was a sports writer, like my dad. We would actually cover games together, sometimes ACC basketball. And there was a game where we were on the road. It was one of the few games that I went to on the road at Maryland. And I remember after the game, typically what you do at home is you'd wait for the guys to shower up. They'd come out, they'd have a press conference, and all the reporters would get to ask the questions. But when you're on the road, you actually go into the locker room and ask the questions. And I remember there was a gentleman who was attuned to the fact that I was there with my colleague Jenny, and we were the only women reporters. And he took the time to think about that and prepare, my classmates, the guys who had just finished a game, to get them into sweats and such so that we could go in and feel comfortable. And, if I could go back 20 plus years now and find that gentleman and say, thank you, there are plenty of people out there who just the small little things that they think of in the moment, the person who says, well, we should ask if she wants to come. Those happen all the time, and to the degree that moving forward, I recognize those champions at the State House or elsewhere and have the opportunity to acknowledge the small effort that can be made that makes such a big difference for women in the workplace and elsewhere. I think that's an important thing that I can do moving forward.
So Mary, Kate, we just had local elections, and you are a poll worker. And I saw you there at 7:10 in the morning, and I'm guessing you were there till 8 p.m. at night? 9? Yep. So this being the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, can you talk about a voting experience that was memorable or meaningful for you?
Is this on? Yes. Okay, well, I was fortunate enough, the first time I voted in a presidential election, it was for JFK. And I was so excited to be able to vote for him and to even vote. I talked about it a lot among family members when we would have family gatherings, so forth and so on. And there was one particular person in this group who just was ridiculing everything I was saying, and how could you vote for him, and why would you vote for him? And I would give a reasonable answer, at least I thought so. And this went on not just that election, but other elections as well. And the whole frustrating part of all of that is this person was not even registered to vote. And so he was giving me all this, I gave it away. This person was giving me all this advice about what he thought should happen and why he would not vote for this particular person. And it angered me so, but I could never convince this person that they should, if they had so much to say and had so many feelings, that they should get themselves down to the town hall and register to vote and make your voice heard. So that is the experience that I think of when I saw that question.
Thank you. So I'll work back up. Becky, so can you talk about a voting experience that was memorable or meaningful for you?
Well, unlike Mary, my first time voting was for Al Gore, which is not really exciting, especially given how the election went out. But for me, the most memorable elections that I voted in have been in the last few years when I've been able to bring my children, and we've been able to vote for people that we know in elections that we've worked on, and my daughter's my supreme sidekick door knocker. So kind of showing her how it all plays out. So, we'll go to someone's kickoff, and then we'll go knock doors, and we'll write postcards, and then we'll go vote, and then either way, we explain either they won and they're going to do great things for our community, or they didn't win, but you know what? They brought up really great issues, and they really pushed the conversation forward, and they made their opponent really work for it too, and hopefully their opponent's going to work harder now that they've won. And we just get on to the next election, but seeing that full circle with my kids and kind of raising voters is so important to me.
So Tina, same question. So it's the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Can you talk about a voting experience that was memorable or meaningful for you?
So voting has always been something that has been very important to me. I grew up in a house where my dad was frequently on a ballot, and so I was used to holding that sign downtown Wakefield, knocking on doors, listening to him go on and on and on. So I was used to that, and I remember very vividly the very first time that I felt that passion within me. I was in Chicago. My family was there before we moved back here, and it was in 2008. And I saw a change in our country. I saw an opportunity for hope, for something different, for something that was bigger than what I was used to. And I remember standing in line for a long time to vote in that 2008 election. My children were very young at that point in time. And being in Chicago, I stayed up late to watch the results come in, and we elected somebody who was talking about hope and prosperity. And they were right downtown at Grant Park, and they were talking when he won. And it was just such an emotional experience to watch that and to see it built that I decided at that point in time that I wanted to get involved in the process. And so I became a polling, election official, they call it in Cook County. Went and took the course, and the very next election I was there for the same hours. It was crazy long. I don't know how you do it. But you get to see that process, and then you get to meet all of your neighbors, and you get to listen as people are standing in line, what's important to them, and they may see the world differently than you. They may believe the issues differently than you, but there is something that you can always connect with them on. And just that smile, that they're there to vote and participate, is wonderful, and we need more people to do that, regardless of what your position is, to get out and vote. 100 years, women have had this opportunity, and I can tell you I'm not going to sit on the sideline, regardless of whether the person I vote for wins or not. I'm going to get out there and exercise my right to vote, and we need to encourage every single person to get out to do that, because if they don't, they really don't have any position to stand on to make a comment on what is going on in the government if they didn't participate in it actively.
I'm trying to be a fair moderator, but I will say, Kate, there is nothing like seeing your name on a ballot and getting to fill in that bubble when it's your own name. And so now you've gotten to do that a couple of times. Can you just talk your most meaningful experience with voting?
Sure. Maybe I'll start at the end and work my way forward. So the day after the primary, which was in February, my parents had flown in from Virginia to hold signs with me. We'd had everybody at every poll. There were 10 different locations. You know, I've been racing around to check on everyone, take photos, wait for the results to come in that night. Had like really nice rapport, particularly with you know, Anne McGonigal-Santos here, and so we had a nice conversation that evening. And you know, got home late. And the next morning we're having breakfast. My parents are still there. They're flying out later that night. Marcus headed off to work, and Harrison comes downstairs sort of sleepy-eyed. Oscar's already awake in his high chair, and we're all having breakfast. And then Harrison at some point just stops, looks around, this is the almost 7-year-old now, and goes, "Did Kate Lipper-Garabedian win last night?" Which puts it in perspective, right? So it's certainly you know, a different experience to see your name there, as you say. And the first time that happened for me was in 2017, running as a city councilor. And so it's very special to me to get to go. I went to vote that time with Harrison, and then in the last couple elections, Oscar's been alive, so we've gone as a family with him as well. But you know, I think just I've always been interested in elected service, insofar as my mother covered politics at the state level. So she was also a newspaper reporter. That's why I like politics, and I like, you know, jump shots. And she was always she was an editorial writer, so she did not take, you know, public positions. You know, well, I should say first she was a newspaper, she wasn't a columnist, she covered this, just as a journalist. So she didn't take positions then as editorialist, it was part of the board that made the decisions together. So she was always very reserved about who she was going to vote for, but I remember going with her to the ballot box and being so curious. Mom won't talk about this, but who's she going to vote for? And so ever since then, I've certainly have felt the same calling as, you know, my friends here tonight, where you have to show up, you have to think about being involved, and also seeing it not as a winner takes all, but as a hopefully the whole process can be so important in influencing each person who's running to think more critically and deeply about the issues, and the fact that they're going to represent everybody, not just the people who voted for them, but the whole community, and learning from, you know, the other candidates, and thinking about that. And it's certainly been, you know, a lovely experience to hold signs with somebody who's on the ballot, you know, who's running for the same position, and be able to have a civil conversation and talk things through, and know that you can continue to work with that person moving forward. But at the end of the day, it's nice also not to have to take it too seriously, and remember that you have more than one identity, and if I forget that, Harrison will remind me.
So there's a same question for all of you, and I'm just going to tell a little story. 2 years ago, I was having a conversation with someone, and he said, "What are you doing over the weekend?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to hear Congressman Clark, our great Congresswoman, give a speech, and then I'm going to this fundraiser, and then I'm going to yoga." Like, that was my weekend. And he's like, "But what are you doing for fun?" And I said, "I just told you. I'm going to go see Catherine Clark speak, I'm going to a fundraiser, and I'm going to yoga." And it struck me that my idea of fun was not his idea of fun. And my idea of fun hasn't always been everyone's idea of fun. But you, all of you, our panelists, we're so lucky here that you guys are so involved in so many different ways and in so many different organizations. And I just want to know a little bit, for me, it was that they're fun, but what drives you to get involved in all that you do? Okay. Yes, you first.
Well, I didn't get involved. Well, I guess I was kind of involved in high school. I graduated from this wonderful institution here in 1959, so you can do the math. But I was involved in things then, and then when things started, it seemed I would find things and hear about things and think, well, I believe in that, and why don't we get involved? Or why don't I get involved? And whether it was the paper drive and bringing recycling into town, I can remember those of you who go back a few years, the trucks that were parked in the old junior high parking lot, those hot days, we'd fill up those trucks with papers that people would bring, and I can remember going to Reading to pick up the papers to bring them there, and it just is very gratifying, which is not why I get involved, but it still is gratifying to a point to become involved and see that perhaps you're making a little bit of a difference. And now with Wakefield Alliance Against Violence, Bob and I, my husband Bob and I, are co-presidents, and he's been involved a lot longer than I have, but I was kind of involved behind the scenes with him because he was president and doesn't know how to use a computer. And so there were things that needed to be done for him to run a meeting and so forth and so on. And there came a time, the reason I became treasurer was he said, well, you know, we've lost our treasurer and no one's stepping up to the job, and we're going to have to hire someone. And I thought to myself, well, that's silly. Hire someone, you know, you've been raising money to do good work, and why spend money for that? I know how to write checks. Well, little did I know there was a bit more involved. But still, it's very gratifying to, again, know that you are making a little bit of a difference in that very sad issue that we are fighting. So that's about what drives me. Yeah.
The lawyer in me is just going to say there was an objection from the crowd. As you said, your husband doesn't know how to use a computer. So I just want to have that on the record. Kate, so you're involved in making a difference. What motivates you to get involved?
Well, when I think about sort of where my career trajectory took me, I do come back again to my parents and both writing for newspapers, and the fact that you know, our nightly dinner conversations were often about what they had been covering. And that's particularly true, you know, obviously the sports scores are interesting, but, you know, what Mom was covering was really fascinating to me. And there was a human element to the developments that were happening at our state house or in D.C. I remember she covered welfare reform in the 1990s, and the way she did that was she did a series of articles over the course of a year where she reached out and followed a few different families who that reform effort was going to impact. And I remember going with her to meet with some of those families in their subsidized housing in Richmond, Virginia. And then at one point we went back to visit with a family, and they had moved and no one knew where they were, and she never found them. And it just sort of reinforced that, you know, the policy decisions we make can have immediate impacts on people and their families. And that can be particularly true for people who maybe are living in a less privileged position than my family is. And so I'm very mindful of that. It's certainly, as a student growing up, you know, I went to public schools, and for the first 9 years of my public schooling, I was a racial minority in the Richmond public schools. And the experience there was very different from when I went to a magnet school that had a different funding model, a different parent community in terms of those who had more resources to be engaged. And so it was sort of, even as a child, I could see how the funding decisions that were made in terms of how we provided for schools and the conditions of those schools could impact students, immediately. And so I think that's why, as in my professional career, I've looked for opportunities to first sort of work within the system to think about how I can serve as a teacher to support those kids, and then going to law school to look at education from a more macro level. Because I think it comes to, there are so many important things we can do daily to support our community, to support kids in the community, people who are struggling with things. But then we also need a framework of laws and regulations that account for the nuances that people are dealing with in their lives, and think about the different perspectives and how people are navigating life, and trying to set a stage for people so that they're able to, achieve to their full potential with the options available to them. And so I'm very excited to get to represent you at the State House. Even though I am only going to represent 3 of the 7 precincts officially, I do consider myself a Wakefield representative, and so I look forward to sort of learning from people here and continuing to deepen my understanding of these issues. I just believe at the end of the day passionately that government has this potential to really make an impact and help people progress on their path, and I want to be a part of that, that reality. So thanks.
I'm just going to keep on calling you Captain Pat because I like that. So you get involved in making a difference in so many ways. What drives you?
So there are a lot of things that drive me. I grew up in a family where public service was expected. Obviously, my dad was on a number of different committees here in Wakefield. My mom was a teacher and a leader, troop leader, mentor. I'm one of 5 children, and I'm happy to say that a lot of us served this country or are in positions where they are daily mentors and leaders, whether it's in the education or law enforcement. It was just expected. I remember coming home on the weekends. My dad always had the news on. I think he watched the news a lot. My mom still does. And we watched the Sunday morning programs, and you were always involved in listening to what's going on in politics. So you always had an opinion, but you always listened to the other voice. I wanted to make sure that I was able to help those that maybe didn't even know what their voice was or where their voice could take them. So I've had the opportunity to be a coach. I've had the opportunity in my job now to help coach and serve those who have served our country and help them plan for a more secure future, because that's truly important. You can't do an awful lot if you can't take care of yourself. I've had the opportunity as a mom to work with young children to give them more of an expectation of where they can go in this world, and not to have limitations on what your expectations for the future are. Just because you're not there today doesn't mean that you can't lay the path and the foundation and have goals to get you there in the future. Do what you can with what you have today, and then plan for a more secure future. And then finally, I really enjoy working with people, so I laugh at Mary's story. I'm going to share one from when I was here at Wakefield High School. During that time, the AIDS epidemic was pretty big. And I was on the Social Awareness Committee, and we decided to give condoms out because people were having sex. And it was a very controversial issue, and my dad at the time was on the school committee, and I remember him flipping out at home. Like, we were in the newspaper, my name was there, I think I almost made him have a heart attack. And I explained to him, Dad, I'm not having sex, but I do have friends who I know who are, and I want to protect them. And it was a very difficult discussion, but it was one that I constantly remember in the back of my mind is I have always wanted to help those who maybe didn't have a voice and couldn't do for themselves And I had that voice, and I had that opportunity to make a difference in their lives. So when I get up and I go to work in the morning, or I'm working with my children, or I'm coaching other people, my goal is to make their lives a little bit better tomorrow, and truly believe that anything worth doing is worth doing to the best of your ability. And that was my dad's motto, and I continue to live it every day.
Hi, Becky.
Still here.
So you're involved in so many things as well. Can you talk about what drives you to get involved? And can you also tell us all about this thing that we've heard about called the audacity of no, and what it is and why you spend time doing it?
Sure. So like Captain Pat, I grew up, my family was just, that service was part of our lifestyle. My dad was in law enforcement. He also served at our church's parish council. My mom was on the zoning board. We were always volunteering with the church and kind of going to various events. And then also within politics, like I was a little 12-year-old, 8th grade legislative page in the Vermont State House. I have my picture with Howard Dean that I sometimes do on a throwback Thursday. And then, in 11th grade, when everyone was going to like Italy or Germany on their international trips, I was the nerd that went to DC to meet our then state representative, Bernie Sanders, also a great throwback picture. So it's always just kind of been a part of who I am. I think what turbocharged my involvement was actually having kids, and it wasn't so much for my kids. I kind of came to the realization that they'll be fine. We have an amazing network. My husband and I are very fortunate. But I would look at various events around the world, or even in my community, through the lens of what if that was my child. I think the Syrian refugee crisis nearly brought me to my knees seeing these children, or Sandy Hook happened 2 weeks after my daughter was born, and those events just kind of woke me up from like my selfish 20s into getting into my 30s of, okay, I can't wait for somebody else to do something. I think Barack Obama said it. He's not credited with it. It goes back further than him, so I don't want to get added about this. But we are the ones that you're waiting for. We are the ones that we're waiting for. If you want something done, it's got to be us. It's got to be, don't wait for someone else to come and solve a problem. Tackle it yourself. As for the amazing podcast that's available on any place you listen to podcasts, this was actually a way that my co-host and I, is actually Sam Hammer, who ran for state senate, and Yael Mazur-Garfinkel, who was her campaign manager, and I, during the campaign, we were hanging out one time, we were all like, we're really funny, like we should just start a podcast. And as it turns out, we are really funny. And we did start a podcast, but what it was is we weren't really finding a lot of media outlets that covered local and national politics, but also from the lens of a woman. So I think we, whether it's things that aggravate us as working moms, or it's, the next Supreme Court case that's coming down that's going to affect all women or all people in the United States, they're just topics that we cover kind of like with a female lens of like, how does this impact us? And here's something, maybe there's so much news going on, and there's so many like crazy news cycles, and things get missed every day because there's so much going on. Like we highlight the items that we find important, whether it's on a Massachusetts level or a national level or a global level, or like my kids stop having spirit weeks. Like they drive me bananas as a working mom. So just things like that, but kind of with the female lens of how does this impact us, and why is this important?
I want to make sure we leave it open for questions, but my last question was my favorite one, so I'm going to ask it. But I'm gonna. You guys have said a lot of great things. So the last question is: we have this room in front of us. What advice would you give to the next generation? But I was taking notes while you guys were talking, and you guys already gave some great stuff. So I'm going to repeat all this, and then you have to think of something different. And it's like one sentence because we're on a time crunch. So. Mary told everyone to register to vote, and I think we all say that. It was said to continue to raise your hand, be a mentor, find your tribe, speak up for women in the room. Those were some of the things said. So, what else? What advice would you give to the next generation? One sentence. Do you need more time to think? Oh, then we're starting with you.
One sentence would be sure. Oh, sorry. Use the mic. And find something that you can be passionate about and find a way to get involved with that passion.
I would say embrace the uniqueness that is you, sort of the passion that you have, while recognizing that it is likely you are never alone and that there are people around you who want to support that passion, who maybe share it, and that you can build a community around it.
So one sentence on this is very difficult for me. I might make it two. So my very first thing would be to this next generation is to put your phone down. Make eye contact with people. Communicate with people. Send them a birthday card or a happy birthday, everything is okay card instead of just texting them. And then my second thing would be to make sure, especially as women, that we are consistently lifting each other up instead of finding ways to pull each other down, because life is hard enough as it is. Be that person's mentor, be that person's guide, be that person's biggest cheerleader, and embrace their success.
So this is going to sound like very basic advice, but it's taken me 40 years to figure out, is take care of your body and your health. Make that a priority in your teens and 20s, because it's a hell of a lot harder to take care of it 20 years later. Take care of your mind and your spirit and your soul, whatever that looks like for you, to recharge yourself, because again, that's a lot harder to kind of grapple with as you age, if you've been neglecting it. And then I think Captain Pat will agree with me, is take care of your finances from a very early age, so that you are set up to do, if you want to leave a job, if you want to leave a relationship, if you want to devote your time to a lower paying job that's more meaningful to you, take care of those three basic things for yourself, because you're no good to anyone else unless you're taken care of first.
Do I get to answer it too? No. So my advice, because you guys gave me a platform, is, and I say this all the time, I've given this advice for years, is to surround yourself with great women. So that's what you do. You surround people who don't look like you, who don't speak the same languages as you, aren't the same religions as you, who are different ages than you, that have different backgrounds than you do. And that's what you do to succeed. So that's my advice to everyone. And thank you.
So we're going to have the panel stay up here for a little bit, but we're going to open it up to audience questions. And we tend to like to give priority to the younger generation to ask some questions first, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience. So if anybody has a question, raise your hand. Right? Oh my gosh. All right. My daughter Sydney has a question. What's your question? All right. False alarm. Does anybody have a question? I have She Majors group? Okay. There you go.
Could you repeat the name of your podcast, please?
With pleasure. Yes, that's called The Audacity of Nope. Kind of a play on a famous biography. You can find it wherever you download podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, like Google. I don't know. Those are the only ones I use.
Do you want to ask that question? Okay. Anybody else have a question?
I'm going to ask this one for my daughters, because they attended this panel discussion the past 2 years, but they couldn't come tonight. And they're 12-year-old Girl Scouts, and they always want to know if the women on the panel, if any of you are Girl Scouts. So I want to report back when they ask me about tonight.
I was a Girl Scout.
Yep.
And your daughter's a Girl Scout.
And my daughter's a Girl Scout.
Anybody else? I can't see with the lights. Oh, okay. Sorry. That's okay.
So I have a question about raising sons, because I have a daughter and a son, and I talked to my daughter about women's empowerment and the International Women's Day and all the things. But when it comes to raising boys, I think that we're not going to move forward without bringing men along with us, because we're going to need their voices in the room, or we may not be heard as loudly as we want to be. So I try to talk to my son about, women's equality, and, he asked me, well, what do I do when my wife has a baby? And I said, you do more than you did before. So you do half until then, and then you do more. So we talk about, how men aren't just going to sit on the sidelines with raising children, et cetera. So I'm not going to continue to go on, but what do you guys do? I know some of you have sons, to bring them along in the conversation.
You have the oldest son, so.
So I am blessed that I have 2 children. My daughter is 15, and my son is 14. They're 16 months apart. And my son right now lives in a house with 3 very strong women. So I'm more worried about him getting beat down by the woman. But he understands that we are equals. He understands that we do have great strength. In numbers especially. He is definitely aware of our capabilities, and I would say that he is more comfortable with some of the things that are typically, women's. He's very much involved in music. He's very much involved in theater. He is okay with himself, but he still does all of these athletics. Make sure that your man knows how to support a woman and be respectful to women. I'm still working on that. It's a little difficult with him at times because he is a 14-year-old boy, but I will say he sees it, and encourage him to do things like this. Come to events like this. Take him with you when you go to vote. I was very fortunate that I held a number of different pre-election events with people that have been elected here in town, and he's participated and seen the women's issues that are out there, and he kind of leads the charge. So I definitely think that you want to encourage them to be supportive to women and to raise women up, hold them on a pedestal, because it is a little bit sometimes harder for us, but to give them a voice and to empower them to be successful as well.
So my son's only 4, but we are working on this. I think in our family, honestly, the way we're tackling this is leading by example, and I think that's how my husband and I both grew up in the same way. My dad, both my parents were, working class. My dad was did like 2nd and 3rd shifts a lot, so he was actually the primary caretaker a lot. So I grew up expecting Daddy to make dinner and braid my hair and things like that, and my husband's family was the same way. Like, his mom worked a lot, and his parents kind of traded off. So in our family, it's I do drop off and you do pick up and things like that. And leading by example and showing that there's no role, no one has a role here. We're a family and we work together. But then also having larger conversations about what's going on in the world for, as far as like women's rights and things like that. I saw a tweet the other day that was, yes, it's super important to tell little girls that they can become president, but it's probably more important to tell little boys that girls can become president. And having those conversations and making that normal, making that like, no, we haven't had one yet, but look at all these, 4 years ago we had 1 woman running, and this year we had 5 women running, and isn't that amazing? And, just kind of having those conversations from early on so it's a normal thing and not such like a miraculous event that we, can't believe is happening. is my take at the end.
So I agree with both of those comments, and I also think just by asking the question, you are already, there, right? The fact that a parent is taking the time to be intentional and thoughtful about how we think about gender for whether we have sons like I do or daughters or both is, half the battle. I think as a parent, you realize you're sort of making it all up as you go, which is pretty, when I realized that my parents were just making it up as they went, I don't know. But, I think I alluded to this earlier that, it's just as important as it is for girls to feel like that their options are endless and limitless. It's the same for boys, for me. So it's also making sure that I'm challenging what it means to be a boy and what kinds of emotions boys are allowed to feel. I was last week at a Melrose Alliance Against Violence, and the Men for Maeve had an event where they had these speakers come and talk about raising boys and allowing men to what is masculinity, rethinking that, allowing men to to explore any career path in which they're interested in, to feel pain and sadness and be able to express that. So that's something that I think about as a mother too, is trying not to sort of limit Harrison and Oscar to what would be boys will be boys, or we don't cry, things along those lines as well, I think will hopefully make a difference.
Oh, okay. All right, I think we need to wrap up, but if there's one more question, we might be able to do one quick one. Otherwise, we will move on. Anybody? Anybody from this side? Okay. Well, thank you, panel. This was an excellent discussion. Give it up again. Thank you, Mehreen, for moderating. You guys can take your seats. So, thank you to those of you who asked questions as well. Before we move on to our closing performance by She Major, I want you to just take a minute and reflect on what you just heard, and think, was there any sort of aha moment for you or something that maybe shifted your mindset? And as we hopefully demonstrated, a gender equal world is crucial, and we need to work on that. So I'd like you to think of these questions. We're going to do a little bit of an activity here. So think about, what action can I take or can you take to help forge a more gender equal world? Or what belief can you hold that will help you maintain that gender equal mindset? So I want you to think about that for a minute and turn to somebody near you, hopefully somebody you don't know, and just discuss for 2 minutes kind of either your takeaways from today or what sort of that commitment might be, and start just thinking through that. So take 2 minutes now to talk to a neighbor about what you can do. Okay. I'm going to rein us back in here. It sounds like you guys are having great discussions. So now that you've had that quick dialogue, hopefully you're passed out a circular activity card for the International Women's Day logo. And what we'd like you to do is write down that commitment, that action. Write down your pledge for what you will do or what mindset you will take to help forge a more gender equal world. And if you noticed when you came in the hallway, we had a little wall where you can then tape that up onto the wall. And you can take a picture with it to remind you of what you wrote. You can write your name on it if you'd like. It doesn't have to be, it can be anonymous to add to the wall. and we're actually going to get to display that wall of our pledges for gender equality in Town Hall for the next couple weeks. So we're going to move that into Town Hall. So it can be what you just discussed, or it can be something else that doesn't, whatever you want to do. And if you're stuck for an idea, I have some ideas that International Women's Day provided, or you can get inspiration from the wall out there. There's more pens out there if you don't have one, and hopefully on your way out you can add your pledge. So with that, I would like to, and you have time to think about that too while you're listening to this last song from She Major. So I'm going to invite She Major back up. And this next song they're going to sing is it's called Nina Cried Power. It's by Hosier, and it is an awesome rallying cry, sort of protest anthem to work on social justice.
Before we start, I just wanted to say one more thank you. And we hope you enjoy our last song. That's okay.
It's not the waking, it's the rising. It is the grounding of a foot uncompromising. It's not forgoing of the light, it's not the opening of eyes. It's not the waking, it's the rising. It's not the shade, we should be past it. It's the light and it's the obstacle that casts it. It's the heat that drives the light, it's the fire it ignites. It's not the waking, it's the rising. It's not the song, it is the singing. It's the heaven of the human spirit ringing. It is the bringing of the line, it is the bearing of the light. It's not the waking, it's the rising. And I could cry, power, 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 Lord. Nina cried power, Billy cried power, Mavis cried power. And I could cry, power, power, Lord, power, Lord. Curtis cried power, Patty cried power, Nina cried power. It's not the wall, but what's behind it. Lord, the fear of fellow men is near assignment, and everything that we're denied by keeping a divide. It's not the weak and it's the rising. And I could cry, power, 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 Lord. Nina cried power, Lennon cried power, James Brown cried power. And I could cry, power, power, Lord, power, Lord. Phoebe cried power, Joni cried power, Nina cried power. And I could cry power. Power has been cried by those stronger than me, straight into the face that tells you to rattle your chains if you love being free. Oh, Lord, I could cry power. 'Cause power is my love when my love reaches to me. James Brown cried power, Seeger cried power, women cried power. Cried power, James cried power, Lily cried power, Kenny cried power. need a crowd power.
So it falls to me to say goodnight to you all. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We hope you found the evening inspiring and enlightening and empowering. Thank you so much to our fabulous panelists. They are Becky Gilding and Kristinia Encarnacao Patt and Kate LIPPER-GARABEDIAN and Merry Eldridge, and to our moderator, Mehreen Butt. Thank you to the Wakefield Human Rights Commission, and especially the subcommittee for putting together tonight's program. That would be Jan Betcher and Maria Muti and Benny Wheat, Isabel Castro, and Mehreen Butt, and myself. So also we want to thank She Major and Anna Morell. They are fabulous as always. And to Mr. Andrew Cedrone of the Galvin Middle School for sharing his diversity advocates with us tonight. They were terrific. They were very, very helpful. We also want to thank Jamie Hale and the Girl Scouts of Wakefield for helping us decorate the hallways with their girl and women power posters. And the Wakefield Police Department supplied us with eco-friendly water bottles. It's always nice to be earth-sustaining. So, and again, to our town council and our school committee for the support. Please remember that we have local elections coming up on April 28th. And make sure you get out there. Voting, as we've talked about a lot tonight, is one of our most basic but powerful actions that we can take for equality. So get out there and vote. We do have some voter registration forms available, I think. No? Oh, well. You can get in touch with us, though, if you'd like, and we'll get them to you. And then lastly, please don't leave without giving us the card that you have and writing your commitment on there and posting it on the wall. So again, thank you all so much for coming, and be careful, take care of yourselves, and be well. Thanks.